All right. Pleasant good evening, everyone. Welcome to the New Jersey Developmental Disabilities Network Virtual Town Hall. My name is Michael Brower. I am an attorney at Disability Rights New Jersey. I want to welcome you all here. This is part 3 of our 4-part series, Reopening and Reimagining. Tonight, we're going to be focusing on reopening schools and factors to consider. As we go through, you're going to notice that you're in the Zoom. You'll be entered muted and with your cameras off. I would ask that you please keep yourself muted and keep your cameras off. I don't think you have the option to turn them on at this point, but that helps us cut down on chatter, background noise, and we are recording the session. That way, folks who can't make this will have the opportunity to hear a nice, clear presentation and they'll be able to understand everything that's being said. There are captions available if you push the closed caption button. There's also a chat box that we'll be using. If you don't see the chat box on your screen, you'll see a black bar with some of your options. There'll be 3 dots that has the word more. You push that, it'll open a drawer, and you'll see the option to open your chat box there. I want to plug advocacy activity that Disability Rights New Jersey is undertaking. We are looking for any sheltered workshop participants, their family, or sheltered workshop staff to share their thoughts and experiences on the closures due to COVID-19 or general thoughts and experiences related to sheltered workshops. Anyone who wants to reach out and share their thoughts on that can reach out to advocate@drnj.org. Appreciate that. Next, I want to introduce our DD partners who are on the Zoom tonight. We've got Mercedes Witowski, Executive Director from the New Jersey Council on Developmental Disabilities. You'll hear more from her later. From the Boggs Center on Developmental Disabilities, we have Colleen McLaughlin, the Associate Director there. Our special guest, the Office of the Ombudsman for Individuals with Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities and their families. We have Paul Aronson, the Ombudsman, and Christine Bachter, the Associate Director. From Disability Rights New Jersey, Gwen Orlowski, our Executive Director, my boss. That's a few other folks that you'll hear from later on. A few special guests that we'll introduce as it's their time to come around. I want to do a couple more housekeeping matters before we get into the meat of the webinar though. First of all, we want this to be a dialogue. We're going to be keeping the chat window running the whole night. So if you have any questions, any thoughts, if you want to share a resource, feel free to drop that information in the chat. We find it's been a really valuable resource to for people to communicate both ways and make sure this is a dialogue. That's the easiest way to communicate with us if you have a question, or for one of the presenters if you have a question for them. You can also, if you are not on a computer or can't use the chat box, you also have the option of emailing or texting on an SMS-enabled phone your questions or thoughts to questions@drnj.org. I'll be keeping an eye on that live as we go through. So if you have anything there, you can either send an email if you're listening on the phone, or you can text questions@drnj.org. Message and data rates may apply. With that housekeeping, I'm ready to hand this off to Mercedes. Mercedes, you can take it from here.
Thank you, Michael. And thank you all for joining us tonight. On behalf of the 3 DD Act partner agencies, the Boggs Center, Disability Rights New Jersey, and the Council, along with Paul Aronson, the Ombudsman, and Christine Bachter of his office, we are very grateful that so many of you are tuning in this evening, and we hope more of you will get to see this session since it's being recorded. So as we've introduced these sessions since early April, we're introducing these as conversations, exchanges of thoughts and ideas, comments and concerns. And I know that each of you would hope, like me, that we had answers. We had all the answers, but one thing that we've learned through this pandemic is that the things that we learn today can change very often, and what we found worked may not continue to work because of complications or other factors. So our 4 organizations are here tonight to hear from you, and we hope to continue to lead our advocacy work and our educational efforts, but we're also very committed to making sure that we know when to listen, and tonight is a night for us to also listen. Because we need to hear, we need to be informed as to what's working, the challenges that you're facing. It's your voices that inform us, to do our jobs. There hasn't been, an aspect of our lives that has been untouched by this coronavirus. And we also know that people with disabilities and their families have even been more significantly impacted. So from the abrupt closings in our state in mid-March, with schools closing, day programs closing for people with disabilities, to the challenges of remote learning and lost skills and jobs and businesses and so many other things that have been impacted, we know that these are real challenges and that we have done our best to help advocate by being informed on what you've shared with us. So if you can go to the next slide, Michael. So tonight, our focus is on reopening children's services. We really, truly do want to hear from you and hope that you'll also listen to each other through the chat and the speakers that we have, and also validating that you're not alone in some of the things that you're hearing or you're feeling, and where there's room to kind of expand our thinking. So schools reopening, I think, might be naturally what brought many of you here tonight. New Jersey has issued the Road Back Restart and Recovery Plan for Education. It's a very heavy read at its 104 pages, but we have groups that have summarized this, and I know we have one of our speakers tonight that will give us that 100,000-foot view. We also expect that we might hear from you tonight around early intervention services for children and children's services through the Children's System of Care. So we want to hear those comments in the chat or at questions@drnj.org if you are not on the chat this evening and listening by phone. We've had one of the most robust chats in our reopening discussion, so we hope that that will continue. We've seen firsthand how a supportive community this has been, and we hope to continue those conversations. So if you could go to the next slide, Michael. You'll see a short list here, and it is short, on just some of the things that we've already heard and some of what we expect we will hear more about tonight. The health and safety concerns around reopening children's services, transportation. I've heard a lot of families say, how do I plan when I don't know? How do I return to my job when I don't know what my child is doing in the summer or in the fall? What are issues around transportation, around remote learning, around the before and after school activities and care that our children receive? As a parent of a young woman with disabilities, myself, my daughter's 30 now, but I went from 5 caregivers providing her the community-based supports that she was accustomed to, where she was out every day, to really one caregiver in the last 4 months. And my daughter Tina has been only experiencing community through the car window. So we understand from listening to your challenges, we understand from our personal experiences. Wearing a cloth face covering is not an option for my daughter, and we hear a lot of that from families about their own children. Technology and internet access, we've heard this is a very important conversation very early on. Many people don't have the technology or internet access to participate in meaningful remote learning when they can and when they're able to and they want to. So I'm glad that the Road Back Plan has a focus on understanding students' technology and access, and I hope that the districts make that a priority for all of those that will benefit. So as Michael said, our format tonight is we have a couple of speakers who will be sharing information and bringing you their perspectives. During that time, we really, again, encourage you to put your comments to what they're saying or other things that you're thinking in the chat, so we can weave those comments, questions, concerns, and your feedback into their time with you tonight. So if you can go to the next slide, Michael. I'd like to introduce our first speaker tonight, who is very knowledgeable. Her name is Peg Kensell. You may know her. She is the Institutional Policy Director at SPAN, and she also co-directs the National RAISE program, the Technical Assistance Center, and as a veteran and former military spouse, she has a keen expertise on working with military families, and she heads the Military Family Support 360 Center. So Peg, it's an honor to have you here tonight. We appreciate your being with us, and we can't wait for you to take us up 100,000 feet.
Thank you very much for that kind introduction, Mercedes. And I would be remiss in not saying that I'm also a very proud member of the New Jersey Council on Developmental Disabilities, and equally proud of all the hard work that you have done and the council's done, especially in these times. So I want to thank you for the opportunity to talk to everyone tonight about such important information. I might ask you actually to go back to the slide you had prior as we formulate this conversation. So good evening, everyone. I hope you're all safe and well during these trying times. SPAN is an organization that has supported families with children and youth from birth to 36 that have disabilities or special healthcare needs for over 30 years in New Jersey under our U.S. Department of Ed Parent Training Information Center. We have other multiple state, regional, and national programs, and now include some international work as well. So visit us, check out the Facebook, the YouTube, the Twitter, the website. Some of that information will be in the chat box somewhere, and including the 1-800 number where you can call for technical assistance. So tonight we're going to try to talk about the return to programming in light of COVID-19 closures. I'm going to focus a lot of my conversation on the education plan, and we're going to take a dive into the New Jersey Department of Ed Restart and Recovery Plan, The Road Back. That's their title, not mine. I'm going to admit right up front that this plan has garnered more questions than answers, so I appreciate what Mercedes said. We will do our best to answer your questions, or also bring your concerns forward to the department, to the legislature around issues that you don't feel have been addressed. So let's just start with what Mercedes said earlier. The plan itself is about 100+ pages, and not the most exciting reading that you ever had, but it's robust in its page delivery anyhow. There is an executive summary though, that is also, you can also find at the link that'll be in the chat box. So my advice is to start with that, and you can kind of get a taste or feel for it. The other thing is it's broken down and navigated by 4 subject headings, which I'm going to go over briefly. And each of those have links that you can just click on if just that one piece of information is what you want to kind of delve into. So the first subject area is called Conditions for Learning. And underneath that is health and safety standards, standards for establishing a safe and healthy condition for living or learning, academic, social, and behavioral supports, social emotional learning, and school culture and climate. And this is just that one first section. The second section is on continuity of learning, and that's includes the ensuring of the delivery of special education and related services, technology and connectivity, curriculum instruction, professional learning, and career and technical education. So where did my third one go? I lost it somewhere. Well, anyway, so there's 3 and 4 more. I'm sorry, here we go. One May, printing backwards. Leadership and planning though is where I really wanted to drill down on, because that is where there's a requirements to reopen, and there's a really neat little section on what our knowns are and what our unknowns are. And as Mercedes said earlier, every day almost it seems like we have a new unknown from the kind of explosion of cases in the Sun Belt to discussions now on how much may be an airborne disease and other issues around contagions and protections that are appropriate, especially for youngsters, because the fact of the matter is kids 10 and under have not been tested very often, and we have really kind of bare bones data as far as they're concerned. So, and then the last section is around policy and funding. And obviously for school districts, funding is a critical issue. School budgets have gotten destroyed. There's issues around CARES Act funding and what that will, supplant or support for school districts. Issues like Mercedes discussed earlier about technology and connectivity, and kind of strategies on how they can use federal funding and can advocate for more flexibility and how they support their budget. So really dry stuff, but the most important, as we all know, the money piece talks. So since we don't have a lot of time, I do want to focus on a few concerns with the plans as well as the opportunities for your input. So our first issue around the plan was it doesn't really contain a clear set of standard operating procedures. So there's a lot of good ideas. There's a lot of should, could, woulds. But as we all know, especially anyone that's advocated for a student with disabilities, regulation and statute or mandates are a lot clearer and a lot easier to enforce than really good ideas that you should probably think about doing. So they have two different descriptors in the report. One is called anticipated minimum standards, and the other one's called additional considerations. And we're still not clear what exactly that means, except that it's strongly encouraged, but we don't see a whole lot of enforcement actions or accountability actions from the department in there. That's always been a problem in New Jersey with 600 odd school districts and everybody clinging to their local control. But I think sometimes things have to rise above that, and we have to have at least a floor of protections for our students as well as our staff. And that I'm not sure is contained in this plan. So some of the other issues we have are questions, again, that you probably have and I still have, but how schools and districts can meet the CDC requirements that we've heard so much about in the news for the last day or two. But the social distancing issues, especially for school districts that are already overcrowded or don't have enough room. I mean, we know there's plenty of schools where they're still doing therapies in closets or sharing music rooms with art rooms with, other special related services. So how you social distance when there's that kind of crowding, we don't know how that's going to happen. We're also, heard tons of conversation around masks. And now as the states start to require masks, including in New Jersey, what are we going to do as far as kids that have issues with wearing a mask? Is a mask going to be only for students that can't social distance? Is it going to include in congregate? Or are we not going to have any kind of congregate settings, lunch, recess, those kind of things? So ton of questions out there. And then as always, we try to focus on equity issues. If masks and hand sanitizer and et cetera are all required of students, a wealthy district that have parents that have resources, not such a big deal. An urban or rural district that don't have those resources and can't either obtain the PPE, which I know everybody on this call knows about from trying to get it for their own families, to affording it. And same thing with sanitizer, same thing with access to restrooms and all the other things that go with it. So and then of course there's the hygiene question. If you have to leave the room for the bathroom, even though we're talking about keeping kids in the same kind of cohort all day long, how many times do you go out to the bathroom? Do you go unsupervised? Do you go and is it cleaned shortly thereafter? What is the kind of schedule for that? And then how does all of that get staffed? And then that falls back on the conversation we had quickly about districts and resources, because to do half of what is suggested in the plan is gonna demand extra resources, extra staffing, and those kind of things. And school districts don't only not have the extra resources, their budgets are in trouble. So Another issue, especially now that there's a lot more conversation about the airborne characteristics of the disease, is also school districts without proper circulation and ventilation. So what, are you in an old building? What's your school district's HVAC capabilities? We've heard conversation about windows being open, doors being open, keeping free flowing information, which is throwing the fire department into quiver because of fire regulations about doors that need to be shut, not to mention all of the safety pieces around school security and every door being shut except one. So they're at kind of cross purposes, and we don't know where that's going to land. Let me see where else I wanted to go. Just bear with me a second. Okay, whoops, there it goes. Okay, so something else I wanted to talk to you about is what are we going to do with schools and districts if significant number of teachers, such as teachers with underlying health conditions or that are getting older, cannot or do not want to return to work? What is the in-person teaching going to be if we lose, a third of our teachers? And the other question is, what schools and districts can do if a significant number of parents indicate that they are not prepared to have their children attend school in person? A framework for return to virtual instruction. We all know that we went to virtual instruction, or lack thereof, in an emergency process because COVID surprised us all. But we don't see substantial planning or requirements for school districts to have a robust virtual learning. We've gone from virtual learning where there was Google Classrooms, a lot of calls, a lot of interaction, to kids that got packets, once every 2 weeks. So that is, that's a huge issue for us. The other thing is that in the report, instructional time is defined as time spent on standards-based education. So if it's not, if you're doing standard-based learning, you're having instructional time. It does not mean that you're in front of a teacher or in front of your screen interacting. And we have some real concerns with that kind of definition and language, especially for kids and families that were really kind of left on their own with packet work to do. Mercedes brought up earlier, and I was really glad that she did, about the inequities with access to technology and connectivity. We know about a month or two ago that there was still 90,000 kids without any kind of device and 130,000 kids without connectivity. School districts, every school district in the state got a new survey to see, hopefully, if that's improved, but we still haven't gotten the information or the numbers from the Department of Ed, so that remains to be seen. But there has to be, whether it's some of the federal funding, whether it's the CARES Act funding, there has to be a focus on making these a more robust, interactive plan with the supports that families need, because the likelihood of the next year, year and a half, while this disease runs its course, not having to return to virtual or being in a hybrid situation are pretty good.
So Peg, you hit on so many points. And one of the things that I just saw come up in the chat was, what about transportation? From a very specific example, like, a parent who assists their child typically to get on the bus, and that parent would not be permitted to do that. But, complicating and overarching that, just transportation in general. How do you keep kids safe and distanced on buses? So I don't know if you have anything to share in that regard.
No, but it's funny because that was exactly my next bullet. No, it's good. That's what the conversation is supposed to be about, right? But the support or direction for educating students with complex needs is not definitive enough, as to our liking, that's for sure. Transportation is going to be huge. Transportation is a huge issue across the board, just with monies, funding, social distancing, how do you get kids on and off the bus, who's supposed to be responsible for it? You know, the bus driver has to drive the bus. What happens if kids are taking off their masks? Are we going to put, the plexiglass between seats? There's a ton of different things. And that doesn't even hit on kids that have, that need, like you said, the one-on-one support, that have complex medical needs and other issues, especially on those small yellow buses. So yeah, we think it's a gap that's here because so much of this was kind of being left up to the districts to do the right thing. So I'm going to give you some ideas about that as well. We also are real concerned with the one-on-one support for a lot of students that have, nursing care, need support for activities of daily living and those type of things. We also think that there needs to be a moratorium across the board on the use of restraint and seclusion. We think that needs to happen every day, but in light of this plan, when you're talking about students that may be masked or that kind of close contact and the type of anxiety that produces, that it's just an accident waiting to happen. So we think that needs to be just wiped off the board, at least in the emergence of, trying to support the COVID piece. And then, we talk, there's all the challenges that are going to be faced by families if parents have been home, but they have to return to work. And a lot of school districts, they're facing schedules of a hybrid or a partial day, or we're going Monday, Tuesday, they're going Thursday, Friday, Wednesday, you use it for a clean day, cleaning the schools. We've heard all kinds of different half-day session plans, week on, week off plans, but I haven't heard a whole lot of everybody's back full 5 days a week. And not that it's not out there, it just hasn't come across my desk yet. But besides the needing some robust planning for virtual or in-home learning, we also have to think about the gap in support that is for families that are going back to work and not going to be working from home or virtually anymore. And for as far as providing resources for those returning to in-person instruction, after the trauma of the last, well, it'll be 5 months when they go back to school, we think it's really important that there's a focus more on the social emotional learning and trauma-informed practices than necessarily jumping right on, the academic bus, because of that transition back into school and what it might look like. We also remain very concerned about the potential for a significant number of office referrals, suspensions, enrollments that tend to hit our kids a lot, more frequently as well. So any of those additional disciplinary actions, and I think it's a great time to talk about also what necessitates a school resource officer, and again, what that interaction may be in a quote unquote healthy manner or safe manner. So one of our other issues around stakeholder engagement, we, like the council and all the organizations that are represented here, believe that stakeholder engagement's critical, and especially the parents and youth that are representative of that school community. So soliciting broader stakeholder input, planning for in-person, remote, and mixed education delivery systems is imperative, because overseeing the implementation of those plans and making those revisions are the families and the students themselves. So we think that there's just really a minimum requirement in the plan for that, as well as a minimum requirement for ongoing two-way communication with families, especially families who are at the greater risk. So whether it's children with special health care needs and disabilities, families with limited English proficiency, or other limited literacy, that these are the exact stakeholders that need to be at the table. And these are also the ones that we need to ease a level of communication with, because so many people, when this first happened, again, in an emergent under emergent conditions felt so left out and didn't understand what was going on and didn't know what the next step was. And we want to avoid that at all risk. And collaboration is critical to developing this reopening plan. Every school district should have a restart committee. That includes administrators, Board of Ed members, reps from the different education organizations, teachers, and a set of content experts, which include parents, students, and their educators. And they should in turn then, there's two different opportunities, the restart committee and then what they call the pandemic response team, which again must include diverse representation from the community, because that will be who's reacting to what happens situationally after school starts, and also the kind of connections between local and county governments, the health departments, etc. These advisory groups must represent the interests of students and families who face the greatest challenge and who are at greatest risk. And thus their input and perspectives must be meaningfully included in all deliberations. There's mention of them throughout the report. That's a really good idea, but the feedback we're getting is that that's not necessarily what's happening. So what we want you to do is contact your school district and ask to be a member of the restart committee. If it's full, ask if is there a subcommittee or work group that you can contribute to. Ask who the members are of that restart committee and how they will communicate with the school community about decisions they are making. Is the PTA, is the Title I Parent Advisory Group, the bilingual group, or the CPAGs included? Was a survey conducted in your district? And where are the results being published? We've had some concerns. We've seen quite a few surveys that parents have shared with us. Some of them are basic 2, 3, 4 questions, you know. Some of them include a choice of disenrollment and homeschooling. And we've gotten more calls that span over the last 2 weeks about what happens if I decide to homeschool my kid? Should I disenroll them? And, you know, the conversations around the loss of services needs to happen, and parents need to be aware of what they're giving up if they decide to do that. Volunteer for the pandemic response team, find out about their information, what the membership is, protocols, etc., and how their information and their planning is going to be shared with the greater education community. Those will typically be the ones that react to, you know, disease eruption in the school or other kind of protocols that way. And then ask, just keep being the nudge. All right, so what other opportunities are available for me to contribute to the reopening or response plan? Get involved. That's the most important thing. And make sure they understand you want to know, you want to be informed constituent. So I think we could talk about this all night long, but I think I'm going to stop here. I believe we'll have a Q&A following our other speaker, and I look forward to hearing from you. So, and thanks for sharing some of our evening. I know how hard it is to do this at 7 o'clock at night, so I appreciate your attention.
Thanks.
And
So
go ahead, Mercedes.
thanks so much, Peg. Appreciate that, and your more than 100,000 foot view. So we wanted to also bring you Scott Cohen tonight. Scott is a parent of a 19-year-old daughter who is differently abled. He's also a Partners in Policy Making graduate of class of 2017. If you want to know what that program is, I'm sure Colleen will put it in the chat, and encourage you to link there and look at that program, a fantastic program. He's a public high school teacher. He's the chair of the Hunterdon County HISAC, and he's a Family Support Planning Council vice chair at Council 5. So lots of hats, Scott, and we're very interested to hear your contribution on reopening.
Thank you, Mercedes, for that introduction. And like Peg, I want to acknowledge all the good work that the NJCDD is doing on behalf of those with disabilities in all venues. And Peg, thank you for all that you said, because what I'm going to discuss is tying into exactly what you've been talking about, but from two different perspectives, one being the parent of a child, and the other is also as a public high school teacher in the state of New Jersey. So let me start with the parent perspective, because like many of you on this call, I presume you've had very similar situations as I had in the past 4 to 5 months at the end of the school year. And that had to do with a lot of things around change, right? Change is the big operative word. And so it was a ramp up on all sides, and the challenges were plentiful. Certainly, all of them have been discussed already. From a technology perspective, in my own home, there are 4 of us that are using the infrastructure that we have had in play. That includes my spouse, who ended up coming home from work to work from home, myself, who came back to teach from home, my daughter, who is 19, doing her schoolwork, and my eldest son, who is a college graduate and working here in New Jersey, also home. So the complexity of the technology, and even tonight you're seeing that I'm having technology issues and challenges because of that infrastructure in our own home. And I would consider myself to be in a fortunate situation in terms of what I am able to have, recognizing that so many people, as we just heard from Peg, are starting from ground zero with no real true infrastructure whatsoever. So my daughter is in the what we call the 18 plus program, or workplace readiness program. The good thing from her school district was that they did go to daily classes online in Zoom, and that afforded the connectivity to remain for her classmates, and her teachers. As Peg had so beautifully stated, this component of the social-emotional learning and that the continuation of that connectivity between students is so very vital. Even with FaceTime with the teachers themselves, if it's not a daily basis, at least on some regular basis, and I'll talk about that from my perspective as a teacher shortly, is so important for the students. Now, with my daughter's program, they do have SLEs, and they do have rotation assignments out in the field. And my daughter was really looking forward to her next placement, which was going to be in a elementary school. Obviously, that didn't happen. So the district figured out other ways to do SLE that engaged, online tours of different manufacturing facilities, going to art museums and experiencing what it's like to be a concierge. They did their best with the tools that they had, but it was obviously a struggle. We are in a busing district, which is Peg articulately stated in terms of a plan coming forward. We don't know what that's going to look like. Certainly busing is driven by the different school grade levels. There's no abundance of buses to pull in, to outsource, and to bring those students around. I believe the plan, and Peg, you can nod your head or state later, if I read it correctly, it's suggesting 1 student per row in the bus, with every other row having a student. I think the governor just announced that if you have a sibling, the sibling can sit next to you, but the spacing requirements are still the same. So if you think about how many rows are on a typical school bus, you're talking about perhaps 11 or 12 students on 1 bus going to school. Now, it doesn't mean there aren't other viable solutions for getting students to school, but it certainly is an impediment. And when we talk about the structure of the classes, we're going to have to look at that in terms of the schedule itself, whether it's a rotating schedule, 1 week off, 1 week on. The bus infrastructure system is a key component to that. And obviously it's dependent as it rolls down the grade levels to move the other kids through the schools. So we do have that here, certainly. And my daughter does rely on the bus to get to and from school. I would say from her perspective, there were some good things and some bad things. The good things were she seemed to be more engaged in classes. So that was a positive. She seemed to be waiting for those to start and looking forward to seeing her friends and her teachers every day. The hardest part right now for me has been this notion of, as we get our children closer and closer to transitioning out of schools at 21, the notion of getting them so engaged and entrenched in understanding what that transition looks like and how that's going to be supported for them, reverting back now a little bit as a result of this to the notion that my daughter is quite comfortable just staying in her room and not wanting to come out, very comfortable just staying on her technology all day, sitting in her room, on her bed, yeah, on Zoom, connecting with friends, connecting with other people. That is the dynamic of the technology, but what we don't want to see happen is our students end up in that state when they're transitioning out and being comfortable in that modality and then not looking forward to going and engaging with employment and being out of the house and understanding what that kind of connection and relationship orientation looks like. Not much we can do about it, understanding that, but something I just want to put out there that some of you may be experiencing as well. Maybe we'll have some of that interchange in a few moments. So I think those are some of the key things I would say right now that we've been challenged with. Now, my wife is home, as I've said, so she's working downstairs all day on conference calls, and she's tied up most of the day. Since I'm also a school teacher, I am home, so I'm able to engage with my daughter a little bit. They did continue with the ESY program this summer, which was fantastic. Obviously, it's all online. The schools just could not ramp up fast enough per the governor's authorization of having in-school ESY programs. So unbeknownst to me, she had gotten wind that the governor had authorized that, and she did not feel comfortable returning to school, and completely on her own, without me knowing, had notified the school that she was no longer interested in participating in ESY. So that was a big, oh my goodness, what the heck just happened? Fortunately, the school contacted me and said, we've been alerted by your daughter now that she no longer wants to participate. We just want to confirm this. Is this true? So I had to go then have the conversation with my daughter to ensure that her anxiety levels were brought down and that she understood that it was all going to be virtual now. And then she was quite comfortable and willing to go back and engage with the virtual ESY program. So it's all worked out. The virtual ESY program is fantastic. They have a huge lineup. They have people from DDD and support coordinators coming in to do guest speaking. And they really have a very, as decent as I think they can put together for the ESY program going forward through to August 6th. So that will carry her through the summer, Monday through Thursday from 9 to noon. The hard part is afternoon, how to get my daughter engaged to doing other things. So now I'm going to switch over to me as a teacher because it does tie into this role, right? So here I am in the summertime. I have literally spent every day since school officially closed contractually on June 24th, ramping up for the fall. I'm trying my best to figure out solutions for every possible scenario. So I'm building and trying to build a curriculum as best I can, as fast as I can, that will be ready for the worst case scenario so that if it's better than the worst case scenario, the rest of the work will flow through. So I'm spending literally from morning till evening doing this work. So it's not the flexibility that some may perceive that I have the time now to spend with my daughter to help her do what she needs to do as well. So that's just a perspective. It's not anything more than that. But what happened as a teacher, certainly from my perspective, is we were thrown just like everybody else, and it was sort of a tsunami effect, not terribly bad because we've all been migrating to Google Classroom and we've gotten the platforms in play, but to Peg's point, some of our students in the district that I teach in did not have the technology capabilities to be live for either live instruction or Google Classroom or any connectivity. The other issue is the Socio-Economic Spectrum and the challenges faced there. In the district I teach, we have the entire gamut from very low income to very high income. And there's a clear class of bringing elevated awareness to access and equity when it comes to that component to the educational experience. So the school district was able to get students computers if they didn't have them, but also keep in mind in many of those families, they're single parents. There are also perhaps may only be the one computer the school has provided or they may have that's being shared amongst multiple students or siblings in that household. So even though we ended up having architected time that the students were supposed to be, quote unquote, in class on a rotating schedule, those students may not have been able to be in class because their siblings had to use the computer for their class in middle school or elementary or another high school class. So this issue of shared resources within the same household became quite a challenge. So in the meantime, as an educator, I'm trying to ramp up on all the technologies. Now, the beautiful thing was so many corporations and for-profit education institutions were kind enough to open up all of their tools to educators almost overnight and almost all for free. That sounds great, but I can tell you the first 2 weeks, my head was spinning, trying to figure out which tools would really formulate solutions that would meet all of my students. I teach elective classes, which means I have every student in my room. I have 504s, special ed, ELL, and the top of the class to the bottom of the class, all in the same room. So trying to accommodate and ensure, as you know, because of who I am, my sincere efforts to ensure that the IEPs and 504s were being met on the platforms that we had. So looking at all this technology, and I can just give you a quick anecdotal story. The first live class I tried to put together for my students, my periods are 43 minutes each, took me 16 hours to prepare for that 43-minute course. That's one class. So it was, part of that was the ramp up, right? Understanding what I could do based on the technology infrastructure I had at home, based on what the students were looking for. I was polling my students to find out what their interests were through Google Forms, trying to get input and find out what platforms they had at home, what were they using, what was working, what wasn't working, so that I had that data rolling to be able to support them as best I could. So that comes back to the technology issue I explained earlier, the infrastructure in my house and the weaknesses of it. I did that one Zoom class. I was very pleasantly surprised by the fact that the one class I piloted on, all of the students decided to engage and tried to connect in. But my voice was staggered, my video was staggered, the kids were struggling, getting every word I was saying, not only just the gen ed kids. We weren't even talking about the ELL students and others who have hearing impairments or other challenges that were impeding their ability to learn on a regular basis. So that was the first couple of weeks. And then, of course, it was trying to juggle all of the policies that were rolling out from the state, from the district, from the union, from the supervisors, and getting things literally every day in email with updates, trying to sort through as everybody else was trying to sort through. And that got us through sort of the first quarter, and then the fourth quarter, we got a little better in terms of process, a little better, slight improvements, which was good. And then we just moved through the rest of the semester using the platforms that the schools embraced. I ended up not doing too many Zoom sessions because of the infrastructure issues. Also, as I was polling students, I was finding out that different teachers were using so many different tools that they were struggling with understanding how to use all of these things all of a sudden, and they were getting burnt out, quite honestly. They were struggling with understanding. First of all, the feedback I got was that they didn't want me to have any more live instruction. They were getting too much live instruction, and it was too challenging for them. They wanted time to do the work. Also, the pacing of the work. We were given certain parameters by our district in terms of how much work to provide to the students, which was a significant reduction in what I would say would be the normal course instruction. And even with that, the students were pushing back on, it's too much work, I can't keep pace, even with the reduced schedule, the reduced workload. And part of it had to do with, we had some families who were dying with COVID. We had some, so the kids were dealing with those issues. And you talk about social and emotional learning, that's, you know, who's there to support the mental health aspect that you would normally get from some of the support mechanisms already placed in the school district. So, so you had that factor, you had the single use in some houses of the technology. I teach on PCs, a lot of students have Macs. What I teach in terms of what we have in the school technology-wise is different than what they have at home. So working with the kids and trying to help them through the differentials There was that component. So I don't know how much time I have. I could keep talking, but the struggles are there, obviously. From a teacher's perspective, you know, I've been in touch with a lot of teachers across the state and the country. In fact, I've been doing a lot of PD online Zoom calls across the country. There are a lot of teachers terrified about going back into the classroom. There's so much confusing information. The information's changing so rapidly, and change is a difficult thing that we must acknowledge in the process. Everybody adapts to change at different paces. But there are a lot of teachers and educators across the nation who are very concerned. You know, take my situation. If I'm going into a classroom and I'm teaching my students on their laptops in the classroom, but the guidelines are supposed to be social distance from 6 feet away, how do I explain or show a student on their computer what they may be doing wrong, right? I do have tools to take over the computers, but to actually show them. I'm on the kids' computers all day long, typically. So, you know, what will that look like? I happened to go back to do a cleanup day that the district offered. We were required to wear gloves and masks. I'm on the 3rd floor of a 3-floor building, all brick, no air conditioning, and I can tell you I couldn't wait to get out in under 15 minutes. It was unbearable. I don't see how to be able to speak so students can hear you. In order to even breathe, the challenges were plentiful, I have to say. So the whole cleaning process, we talk about the cafeteria. There was discussion potentially of having students now eat in the classrooms. Now that presents other problems. We just went the other way, putting so much stress about moving kids out of the classroom for eating because of rodents, because of allergies, because of so many other issues that happen when people convene and eat in a classroom. So those are other things. Who's going to be responsible for cleaning the room after eating? Is it going to be the teacher's responsibility now, or are we going to have periodic cleanings once a day? Those are all questions that we still have to go. So I'm getting the flag. I'm going to stop here, and we'll be opening it up for questions. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Scott. I think I've seen a few things come up in the chat that maybe we want to somewhat, touch on tonight, but next week, next Thursday, same time, we will be hosting another session on reimagining. And, in that discussion, I think I'll put the topics out there now, but I think that I'd like to have more conversation next week about, how do you assist a student whose virtual learning is not and not easy for them. They have the technology, they have a supportive home situation, but they just don't do well in front of a computer. How do we support those students? How do we, and they're not able to focus on virtual work. We also had a comment about, in terms of reimagining, is there ways that we can consider using other public spaces for schooling, not necessarily the school buildings themselves that have other issues. So Scott or Peg, do you want to just take a minute on that before we go to our final speaker?
I would just say real quickly that, and of course I will bounce to the educator on this, but I can't sit more than an hour in front of one of these Zoom meetings. So I'm either pacing or playing with the change in my pocket or getting up and down, making another cup of tea, whatever. So just being able to have some kind of physicality and movement and my own self-stimulation type responses helps immensely. But it's a tough road to hoe, especially if you have, focus or attentional issues, or, like the rest of us, we're about zoomed out of everything.
Yeah.
And I forgot what the second one was. I'm sorry.
About using public spaces, thinking outside of the school structure.
Yeah. That'll be, that's something to bring to your, restart, or probably the pandemic response team, because there's questions. There was questions about, first of all, isolation. What happens if somebody's positive and in the school, and where do you keep them to keep everybody safe until arrangements can be made to transport them home, or or wherever. The public space that's not necessarily pass the inspections and all the type of things to be an educational building will be stuff that it's going to have to kind of bust through some of those regulatory pieces. So that'll have to be, you know, between the department and, you know, buildings and grounds and safety and those kind of things. So, you know, is it feasible? I mean, at this point, we have to think a lot of things are feasible, but I think there are some barriers to that. Just like the communal piece around everybody staying with their own cohort to, you know, have less interaction with other students, other staff, and that kind of thing. Well, that's great unless you have an IEP that includes being, you know, being in classrooms with typically developing students, and also sometime in your special ed class. Who is your cohort and what does that do to any of your services? So anyway, I went on beyond my quick response, sorry.
Thanks, Peg. Michael, if you could advance 2 slides. I know we have Regina Smith from Disability Rights New Jersey, who wanted to leave us tonight with some things that we might be able to do while we're waiting for the districts to report. So Regina, please.
Of course. So my name is Regina Ann Smith. I'm a legal intern with Disability Rights New Jersey. So these tips are kind of informational in value. They're not to be considered legal advice. They did want to let you know that if you feel like you may need some individualized assistance or legal advice on educational matters, you're welcome to fill out an intake application found at drnj.org. So one of the things that we're really seeing with parents is while we're waiting to get guidance from districts or even the state is what can we do right now? So one of the things you're going to want to consider doing is making sure that all of your documentation is ready to have a conversation about compensatory services. We are offering a webinar tomorrow at noon on compensatory services and extended school year if you aren't sure what that is or you maybe need a little bit more guidance. But you're going to want to record what services your child received, how long those services were they live, was it a recording, which one worked better, and also what the goals were that were addressed from the IEP when schools closed down. If ESY is also virtual, then you're going to want to do the same thing, provided that you have like documentation on what services are you getting while you're virtual and where are the goals. You should also practice wearing masks. So we've heard this concern from parents across the board that wearing masks is probably one of the things that gives people the most anxiety. Colleen McLaughlin is actually on this town hall, and she and the Bog Center developed these really wonderful tools for practicing wearing face masks. So if you go to the Bog Center website, you will see social stories, you'll see tips for parents, and then what you're going to want to do is make sure that you tell your district, your IEP team, about those sensitivities and concerns now. So you want to start that discussion now if you're seeing that, hey, wearing a mask is not for us, we've tried X, Y, and Z, and we're really not getting anywhere. Start to really talk about that while you're doing it, because you could include a behavioral intervention plan into the IEP or even have a physician's recommendation be added. So if you flip one more slide, Michael, you're going to want to stick to a routine this summer. It's a little bit difficult, but that will really help to ensure that whatever school looks like in the fall, one of the things that won't be a concern is that we will be ready for lessons, activities, engagement with related service providers. And at this time, you should be considering the behavioral and emotional health needs of your child. This is something that if your child doesn't typically have behavioral needs or emotional needs, they definitely do during this pandemic. I think we all do. We've all seen a change in ourselves with anxiety, a loss of social skills. Be sure you write those things down so you can share them with the team to create a plan for addressing those concerns within the IEP so it's a legal document. And then finally, you need to allow yourself some grace. Watch Frozen 2 for the 10th time, have some ice cream, go to the beach, socially distance yourself. Remind yourself that this is not a perfect process, but the more that you document, the more you can contribute to the conversation when school reopens. So that documentation is really important.
Fantastic. Thanks, Regina. That's a lot of helpful practical information that people can start to do something. And when you do something, that often will help you move towards where you need to be. I want to highlight Jill Hogel. my other boss here at Disability Rights, dropped the link to register for tomorrow's DRNJ special education webinar in the chat box. So if you want to register for that, definitely click, get yourself registered. It's tomorrow. We have a few more minutes left on the clock. Actually, we have 0 minutes left on the clock. There's a lot of great links in the chat that have been sent around recently. Keep those coming. questions@drnj.org is going to stay live throughout this process. So if you have thoughts, questions, concerns, a request for a future town hall centered topic, feel free to drop those at questions@drnj.org. And you can also send a text to questions@drnj.org from your phone. This session has been recorded. I'll be putting that up with Naomi's help on our Atac YouTube channel. The link will be sent around to everybody who's registered, as well as a copy of all the slides if you want to go back and refer to anything. Just to reiterate, we have one final part in our 4-part reimagining series. That's coming up on July 16th, next Thursday at 7. Tomorrow, July 10th at noon, is the ESY and Compensatory Education Seminar hosted by Disability Rights New Jersey. You can register for both of those events and any upcoming events for DRNJ involvement at drnj-covid.org/upcoming-events. That website contains a lot of updates on different activities Disability Rights New Jersey has participated in response to the COVID pandemic. And again, the questions@drnj.org address is there for you to send any comments, questions, thoughts, or requests for future sessions. With that, we are meeting our cultural norm, which is finishing up at 2 minutes after the hour. I really like it. I want to thank all of our presenters, Peg, Scott, Regina, and Mercedes for putting a lot of effort and getting ready for tonight to deliver a lot of information to us all. I want to thank all of the participants. Without you guys, this doesn't mean anything. And with that, I'm going to sign off. And again, to everybody, a pleasant good evening.